The storm rolled through sometime during the night, and by the time I opened my eyes, the entire street felt lifeless. No porch lights, no glow from windows. Even the houses along the main stretch were completely dark. My generator must have started on its own before I got out of bed, because I didn't realize there was a blackout until I glanced outside. Every home around me sat in darkness. Mine was the only one showing any sign of electricity, any hint that someone was awake and living there. For some reason, that made me feel uncomfortable, almost guilty, like I was taking advantage of something the rest of them didn't have. I don't know why my brain went there. I've always been a little strange that way. I was standing in the kitchen stirring a pot of oatmeal when I heard a knock at the door. I figured it was a neighbor, maybe someone hoping to stash food in my fridge before it spoiled. That kind of thing had happened before. When I opened the door, I recognized the man standing on the porch, but only vaguely. He lived farther down the block, I think. At least, I was pretty sure he did. I'd only ever seen him in passing, getting out of his car with his two kids. Quick nods, polite waves, no real conversations. This time, both children were with him. They looked freezing. The boy kept tugging at his sleeves, rubbing his arms like he was trying to warm his hands inside his coat. The girl's nose was red and raw from the cold. "Hey," the man said, forcing a tired, apologetic smile. "Sorry to bother you like this. Our heat's out." He let out a breath that fogged in the air. "It's been getting colder since last night. The house is unbearable. I noticed you had power and thought maybe we could warm up here." He hesitated. "Just for a little while. I can give you some cash for the trouble." It was already the strangest interaction I'd had in years, but I felt boxed into saying yes before I'd fully processed what he was asking. The kids looked miserable, and he kept glancing down the road, like standing outside any longer wasn't an option. "Yeah," I said finally. "That's fine." I stepped aside. "Come in. I'll make some hot chocolate." They entered cautiously, like they weren't sure they were allowed to exist in the space. I told them to leave their boots by the mat so they wouldn't drag snow through the house. The kids did it instantly. No complaints, no hesitation. Almost too fast. Well-behaved kids, I remember thinking. The man introduced himself as Evan. The children didn't speak. He named them for them. "This is Caleb," he said, resting a hand on the boy's shoulder, then gestured to the girl. "And Lena." I handed out blankets and turned the television on low. The kids sat on the couch without asking for anything, not even what they were allowed to watch. Every so often they glanced at Evan, like they needed permission just to sit still. "You live here alone?" he asked after a few minutes, scanning the living room. "Yeah," I said. "Just me." He nodded slowly, in a way that made me feel like he already knew the answer, like he'd confirmed it somewhere else. I tried to make small talk because the silence felt heavy with him standing there. I asked about his job, how long they'd been in the area, general stuff. He answered politely but vaguely. Nothing concrete, nothing I could really follow up on. The kids barely looked away from the TV. Hours passed. Every outage update I checked said the same thing. No estimated restoration time. I told them they could stay until the power came back. Evan thanked me, repeatedly. Too much. Every time I said it was no trouble, he replied with something like, "Not everyone would do this," or, "We really needed this." I just nodded because I didn't know what else to say. By late afternoon, the storm worsened. Snow piled up faster than the plows could keep up. The world outside blurred into white nothingness. I kept checking the windows even though nothing changed. Having strangers in the house made me notice every sound. Floorboards shifting, the heater clicking, wind slamming against the siding. Around 8, I told him I'd set up places to sleep. Evan could take the guest room, and the kids could share the couch. He agreed immediately. Too quickly. Like he didn't want me to rethink it. I went to bed early, feeling exhausted. Not physically, but from the constant pressure of hosting people I barely knew. I read for a bit, maybe 20 minutes, before the words started to blur together. I remember thinking everything was fine, that I'd done the right thing. But right before I drifted off, a small thought wormed its way in. Why hadn't the kid said a single word to me? That was the last thing I remembered before I woke up sometime after 1 in the morning to a noise in the hallway. At first I wasn't sure it was real. I lay still, listening. Houses make sounds. Mine always had. But this was different. Slow, deliberate, like someone carefully testing a floorboard with their weight. Then my door creaked. Just a little, enough for the gap to widen. I lifted my head. "Hello?" I said. The door opened further and someone stepped inside. It was Evan. He didn't turn on the light. He didn't speak. He just stood there, as if giving me time to adjust to his presence. "Are you okay?" I asked finally. He blinked slowly, like he'd been somewhere else and had to force himself back. "Sorry," he said quietly. "Didn't mean to wake you. I was, hungry." He hesitated, then added, "I just wanted to ask if you'd mind me making a sandwich." Something about his tone felt wrong. It didn't fit the moment at all. His voice sounded flat, rehearsed, like he was reciting lines instead of actually speaking. His face stayed completely neutral, no smile, no expression. "Yeah," I said after a pause, "that's fine." He nodded once, stepped back into the hallway, and shut the door without a sound. I waited, expecting to hear movement in the kitchen, footsteps, cabinet doors, anything. But there was nothing. Just the steady hum of the generator outside fighting the wind. That's when the regret really set in. I shouldn't have let them stay. I shouldn't have opened the door at all. Every little thing I dismissed earlier came rushing back, suddenly twisted into something wrong. The way he always positioned himself behind the kids, the way they kept watching him, the way he'd asked if I lived alone, like he was checking a box. I didn't sleep after that. My heart refused to slow down. I tried reading again, desperate for a distraction, but my eyes kept drifting back to the door every few seconds. At some point, exhaustion must have caught up with me, because the next thing I remember was waking up to the sound of breathing, right next to my bed. I opened my eyes. A figure was leaning over me, dressed in black, wearing gloves and a mask that covered everything except the eyes. I screamed and shoved at him. He caught my wrist instantly. "It's okay," he whispered. "Calm down." It was Evan. Even through the mask, I knew his voice. When I struggled harder, his grip tightened. I kicked wildly and managed to connect with his knee. His hold loosened just long enough for me to roll off the bed. He grabbed my ankle and dragged me back. I clawed at the floor, scrambling for anything to hold on to. Then a small voice screamed from the hallway. "Stop hurting her!" It was Caleb. Somewhere behind him, Lena was crying. "We called the police!" the girl shouted through sobs. Evan froze. Not slowly, completely. Like his brain had shut down for a full second while he recalculated something. Then he let go and ran. I heard the front door slam. The kids kept crying until the distant wail of sirens cut through the storm. The police arrived unbelievably fast, 5, maybe 6 minutes. They tackled him outside in the snow. He barely resisted, just muttering under his breath as they dragged him down. Inside, the kid sat on the couch, shaking. The girl kept rubbing her hands together like she was trying to scrub something invisible off her skin. The boy stared at the floor, refusing to look up. I kept telling them, "You're safe now, it's okay," even though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. One of the officers knelt in front of them and asked how they'd called for help. The girl pointed toward the old wall phone in the kitchen. I hadn't even thought about it, but the generator had kept that line working. I've never been more grateful for that outdated landline. If they hadn't used it, I don't know how long everything would have continued. Another officer pulled me aside and asked questions. How I knew the man, how long they'd been staying there, whether anything else had happened. I told them everything I could remember. They wrote so fast I couldn't even read their notes. About 10 minutes later, one of the officers came back in from outside. He didn't look panicked, but he didn't look calm either. He crouched in front of the kids again. "Can you tell me your names?" he asked gently. They hesitated. The boy whispered something I couldn't hear. The officer nodded and stepped away to radio it in. A minute later, he came over to me. "Did the man ever tell you he was their father?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "Or at least he implied it. He introduced them like they were his." The officer pressed his lips together, holding back a reaction. "They're not his children," he said. "They match the description of 2 missing kids from another state. They disappeared years ago." My stomach dropped. It felt like everything inside me collapsed at once. The girl started crying again when she overheard. When they walked him past me in handcuffs, snow clung to his hair and sleeves. He didn't look angry. He didn't look scared. He looked irritated. Like this was an inconvenience, a delay, not the end. He glanced at me once. "You weren't supposed to wake up," he said softly. One of the officers shoved him forward before I could respond. But the way he said it, that flat, almost bored tone, made my skin crawl. It sounded like he already knew what came next, like he'd done this before. Subscribe and I'll tell you another story the next time you're alone in the dark.